I'm going to tell a Joe story, which Joe's heard before, but it's my favorite intro to who Joe is. So I was involved in a lab, a research lab at Sophia University called the Transformative Technology Lab. And we were just getting started, and we were beginning the process. We were structuring it as a nonprofit, and we were beginning the process of looking for potential funders. And so new in the process that I had gotten an intro to Joe, and I was very excited and very nervous because this was going to be my first time ever pitching to a real VC about this project that I had. So I show up with my wonderful partner Nora, and we go out and meet Joe at this lunch place, and we're talking, he's telling me about his amazing daughter, we sit down, we're really connecting, we have like a good 45 minutes of just, you'll hear Joe, amazing human being, just getting deep, like right from the first second. So I'm like, oh, this is incredible, this is like what it's like to talk to a VC, it's going great. So we get through that, and then we kind of get about 45 minutes into it, and he kind of looks at me and says, okay, so let's talk about your project. And immediately I can kind of feel like, oh, okay, we're switching gears here. So I kind of start looking around, and I start sort of doing my pitch, getting into pitch mode. And within 2 sentences, Joe just looks at me, stops, and he says, I feel tension in my body right now. Like, not mean, not like, telling me I'm doing anything wrong. He's like, I just want to let you know that. And I'm like, oh wow, I just got consciousness shut down right now. And so, and it was really, that moment, he just completely switched the whole angle of the way that I was communicating. And it was a really important lesson, because from that moment on, the rest of the conversation was actually me matching Joe's vulnerability. And that's what Joe brings to the table. He brings not only this incredible experience as a venture capitalist with incredible success both in the for-profit and nonprofit world, but decades of really deep work that has paid off in his ability to be vulnerable and to bring people into a space of vulnerability. So we're going to hear Joe express himself for a little bit, and then after that, what we're going to move into is a session curated and run by Joe, helping us to also achieve that same kind of space of vulnerability with each other. So, Joe Hudson, please take the stage.
Hey, everybody. It was really cool to listen to everybody talk about the 3 words when everybody went around, just to hear the lack of ego in so many responses. It was really a beautiful thing to see. It's a rare privilege to be in a group like this, so thank you. There's this question that seems to be there, and I like the way my cognitive capacity works is I like to question, really questions. That's my big thing, is are we asking the right question? They say in the age of Google, it's not what you know, it's what questions you ask. So there's this question that's going around that I wanted to address, and the question is, can technology affect or help in the development of consciousness, or whatever you want to call it, Christ consciousness or enlightenment or awakening? And I think that question, first of all, I don't like questions that have yes or no answers, because I don't find life as a yes or no answer. But I also think that the question that's being posed is ultimately misleading. So let me give you some thoughts on what's happening in my mind. The first one is what I'm looking at is a room that's actually showing 2 movements in society that are new. One of those movements is business coming in to connection with consciousness development. And then the second one is technology coming into connection with consciousness development in a new way. And so my proposition to you, my suggestion is that actually these 2 things, business and technology, are the nutrients needed for the seed of self-awareness growing around the world. So it's not, can it help? It's actually necessary, would be my assumption. So there's a couple ways to look at this, but let's start with the business for a minute. In 1970s, you were either a businessman or you were an environmentalist. You really couldn't be both. I don't know how many people in the room are actually old enough to remember this, but and somewhere in the 90s, it came up like, oh, I'm a businessman and I'm an environmentalist. And it wasn't until then that the environmental movement got to completely explode in a whole nother level of interaction. So the question is like, what happened there? What's going on? The other way to look at it is technologies in general. What happens when they become more connected? When their connection happens, right? 1984, you were sitting with your Commodore computer or your Apple IIe, and it was awesome. You could do word processing. You could play a game called like Borg, I think it was. There was like 5 things, and oddly, people weren't using their computers all the time, except for a few people. And then, as it became more connected, more relational in its nature, it's just started growing and expanding. And every way that it gets more relational, more connected in its nature, it just grows and grows and grows. Right? So now I have a user interface that's talking to me. It's not talking programmer language, and boom, I use the computer more. And now I can get online and I can talk to people, and boom, I'm using the computer more. And now there's social media, boom, I'm using the computer more. Right? So that's what's happening when technology has this natural development to scale, which is what its kind of nature is, and that development requires connection, it requires connectivity. And it's the same thing with business. So what I like is, I'm going to tell you a metaphor. And so before like any spiritual self-awareness jumps up and goes, that's not fucking true, Joe. I swear a lot. Just like, know that I'm just lying to you right now. I'm just telling you a story to make a point. I don't actually believe what I'm saying, but I'm going to tell the story. Right? And there's 2 paths of self-awakening. The first path of self-awakening, or awakening, is what I'll call the Transcendent Path. And the Transcendent Path looks something like this. It starts with the assumption that I'm ignorant, and it ends with transcendence. And the methodology in this is inquiry and meditation. Right? And so through inquiry and through meditation, I can transcend. I don't know, is that, yeah?
Part of the spice.
Okay, all right. So through that methodology, you can start to transcend, which is a beautiful, wonderful path. I spent 20 years, my particular journey was spending 20 years doing that work. And then there's this other path, right? And they're not really separate, like I said, this is just a magnificent lie I'm telling you. But this other path is one in where you're born basically in error, right? That there's something wrong with you. And through intimacy and through vulnerability, we move into wholeness, right? And that's the other path, and that's more of a heart path, and the first one is more of a head path. Right? It's when those 2 worlds come together that something really magical happens, right? So there's this guy named Stephen Harrison. He's very esoteric. He's been around for a long time. He wrote this book called Doing Nothing. And he has this quote that I just can't ever get out of my head. He's like, give me an enlightened person. I'm going to put him in the back of the car with my 5-year-old for a 6-hour car trip, and let's see how he or she does, right? And we all like to think, oh, there's an end to this game. Like, that's what the ego wants to think. It wants to think, oh, wow, there's going to be a time, and I am going to get there, and it's going to be done. And that's really, as Adyashanti puts it, that's really just your ego's way to get back into the game. Evolution is continual. It doesn't stop. Awakening never ends, right? And so this idea that I have transcended, when you actually interact with those people who have transcended and you put them in the back of the car, you see something else. Yeah. So that relation is necessary not only for the spread of awakening in a society, but that connection is also necessary for the awakening in your own consciousness. It's not just about transcendence, and it's not just about a wholeness. It's about having those two things come together. There's a guy whose name I can't pronounce. He smoked cigarettes. Nazar Gadada, I think it is. And he said, when I look outside of myself, I see that I'm everything. That's compassion. And when I look inside myself and see that I'm nothing, that's wisdom. So it's really a marriage of those two things. So I'm going to say something provocative here for a second. If Buddha knew what he was doing, we would all be awake right now. Think about that for a second, right? If it was onto something that really worked for humanity, what's going on? It's been 3,000 years for that seed to flower. What's happening here, right? So I think about it more in a slightly different way, which is Buddha is like the library, right? Like back in the day, there was like this library in the early timeline, and then somewhere in Carnegie, there became more libraries, and there was easier to access. But even through the library phase, it became really important to what you knew was really important. But as soon as Google showed up, as soon as it was connection, as soon as it was relational, all of a sudden, then it's not what you knew anymore, it's what questions you could ask that became important. It allowed knowledge to blossom in a way that it's been wanting to for thousands of years, right? This is the same idea. What Buddha is that library. And what the movement of business and the movement of technology can allow is for that library to expand the same way the library back in the day, back in Carnegie's day, can expand through the internet. So once again, I'm just making this suggestion, and the suggestion is it's not, is it possible? It's not the question. The question is maybe what is necessary for a consciousness development to occur? What are the nutrients needed to allow for mass blossoming on this planet? And I believe that anything that allows that awareness to become relational, it's not just me sitting in a silent room pretending I know things. It's a test. It's a test. So let me just really quickly explain that a little bit deeper. If I think I know something, I'm like, all right, I've created this really cool laptop. Here's what I don't do. Okay, nobody touch it. I know this works. Right? If I have a really cool laptop, I go bring it out into the world and I say, try to break it. Right? Okay, now, here I am. I just had samadhi. I just had awakening. Nobody touch it. How about, why don't we go out and try to break it? Let's see if it's real. Right? That's the relational aspect of awakening. Right? There's this great moment in the awakening process where you're like, oh man, whew, this is great. Why leave here? But there's something that calls you and says, this wants to be in relationship in the world. I love you right here. You are like making it so easy for me to talk. Every time I look over at you, you have this big smile on your face. Yeah. I'm just letting you know that's charging me up. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so there's this movement of how do we go out and how do we just try to break this thing that we understand, instead of saying, like, you get this spiritual question all the time, and it goes something like, I'm there some of the time, but I can't make it there all of the time. Can you help me just figure out how to be in that place all the time? Instead of saying, hey, so I got this great space. Can you tell me how to see if I can break it? So that I know if it's real. So I know that the thing that I've annihilated isn't the thing I'm actually searching for. Right? So that's a whole nother level of thinking about it. This is the same thing that business does for spirituality. You can sit quietly and meditate and go, I got it. But the mind is a tricky person. There's this great thing. Does anybody here know what depersonalization disorder is? Depersonalization disorder is awesome. So here, go out and read like 5 people and their awakening stories in consciousness, and then go to the Depersonalization Disorder blog, chat group, and read it, and you'll notice that the stories are identical. They tell the exact same stories. The only difference between the two camps is one says, that's a disease, I need it to be gone. And the other one says, dude, I'm enlightened. I kid you not, it's one of the best things in the world, right? That's how tricky the mind can be. It's not only what happens, it's what you meta think about what has just happened. But in business, you don't get to say, I think my customers really, really, really like my computer. Nobody's buying them, Joe. Oh, I think I'm relating to my employees in this really beautiful, conscious way. But they're all quitting, Joe. That's the business, that's the spiritual path of business. It's so rich, you cannot avoid it the same way you can avoid things when you're sitting meditating in a room. And that's the possibility of connection and relationship that happens when business or technology starts entering into the equation. It is the things, or part of the equations that can give the nutrients to the seed planted thousands of years ago by a lot of very beautiful people. It is the equation. It's part of the equation that for the blossoming that we're going to soon experience, I hope. All right, so that's my speech.
Inspiring, as usual. Thank you, Joe. So I'm hesitant to do, I really want to do questions. I'm hesitant to because we have so much more to do. Maybe we'll do exactly 3 questions, and they have to be like, bam, to the point. Okay, so stand up.
Hey, thank you very much. What's the connection between intelligence and awakening? Are they complementary? Are they antagonistic? Are they orthogonal?
Yeah, that's a great question. That might be. Okay. Does that work? Can you guys hear me?
Not yet, but he was going to turn it up. You can just hold it.
Okay, yeah. Now can you?
I had it on mute. Okay.
All right, here.
Put it back on.
Yeah, here, why don't you?
I'll sort that out.
Yeah. Really great question. I'm going to answer it somewhat sideways, which is, so intelligence, what a lot of people mean by intelligence, I would argue, is rational thought. So there's this beautiful neurological study. I'm a student of neuroscience, and it's when people lose their ability to have emotions, they lose their capacity to make decisions. We have this myth in our society that says, I'm going to make a very non-emotional, rational decision, but that's actually not how the brain works. When really great people lose their ability to have emotions through brain damage, it takes them like an hour and a half to decide what restaurant they're going to go to. So if you mean rationality as a subset of something, I don't think they're actually related at all. If you mean rationality as a way to subjugate your emotions, then yeah, I think it's a huge deficit to awakening.
Okay, in the back. You earned it through your excitement.
Hello. Ooh, whoa, sorry guys. Okay, so my question, step here, okay. All right, okay. So my question is around, there's a really famous philosopher called Slavoj Žižek, and he has an RSA about kind of the fall of capitalism.
Yeah.
And he criticizes social enterprises and essentially bundling philanthropy into it's still part of like a system that essentially is like putting a lot of people inversely making it negative for them and essentially making people feel good about living in a first world country. So like what's your kind of thought about like how business plays into philanthropy?
So I think business, like anything, is evolving, and like anything that's evolving, it's not perfect. I think the rationale is kind of like saying that tree over there kind of sucks, and that tree over there is a little bit better, and that tree over there, that's the right kind of tree. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's an evolutionary process, and you can have a social enterprise business that is, not conscious, and they're not worried about the development of the people are in the company. And you can have a socially enterprise business where it's all designed so that the people inside the company awaken through like a DDO or a reinventing organizational structure. So the question, once again, it's not a question that computes very well in my mind. The question that I think is relevant is, what are the models for business that help in the awakening of humanity?
One final, our last question.
You volunteers, you guys are screwed. You don't get to ask questions. It's all.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I think it's a very intriguing idea that business or that enlightenment can use the business model.
Yeah.
The thing is about enlightenment to me is that it's a subjective experience, and that's a big difference from a laptop. So that in some way, if I say, look, I'm experiencing the best feeling of my life for the last year, you could put electrodes on me, but it's only one way of measuring. So measuring a laptop is much easier than measuring a subjective experience. So what is your take on that?
Yeah, so I am in strong agreement. So what I mean to say when I talk about you can just be sitting and meditating and you can have experiences that you think are wonderful, but when you get into the car, it's the same kind of thought process. Like, when I care about awakening is when I treat you with compassion, and when you attack me, I don't respond in a triggered way. That's when I'm interested in it. I'm not interested in people saying I've had a Shakti awakening. I'm interested, and that's why the relational aspect is so important. So the reason I'm saying that the relational aspect is so important, because that's where you get to test, I'm having a great feeling. That's the test, is the relationship. Yeah. And that's what I think business does, and that's what I think technology does by their nature. They test it because they're relational by their nature. Yeah, thank you for the question.
Thank you so much, Joe. I wish we could just do this for another hour.